podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Leaving out the avocado in your salad to save money is not good for morale or your fiber intake. Luckily, State Farm knows the value of the little things. It's why they've got options like insuring your home and ride with surprisingly great rates on both. Because you shouldn't have to give up what you love for great insurance. For surprisingly great rates, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com for a quote today.
This episode is brought to you by HP. When you're working apart from your team, feeling connected can be a challenge. Presenting HP Presence, a more thoughtful, human collaboration technology. With enhanced audio and video features, you can experience more genuine collaboration and feel more connected. Be in the room from any room with HP Presence. Learn more at hp.com/presence.
Bonjour, bienvenue, formidable. That's all the French I've got for you. This is a special French Open preview edition of the Love Tennis podcast. We're probably going to spend the first half hour not talking about the French Open because we've been overtaken by events elsewhere in the world, as always seems to happen to us. But we will, of course, go through the French Open draw, or the top half of the French Open draw, because there's almost nothing going on in both the bottom halves. We'll, of course, go through our fantasy tennis picks. Not that I've made mine yet, because as you can hear, I'm hungover. But I will have a go on the hoof. And of course, we will talk about Wimbledon and the huge decision that was made yesterday and announced by the ATP and the WTA. I am, of course, as always, joined by that man, George Belshaw, the other man, Calvin Betton. I'm James Gray of iNews and iNewspaper, who had their first staff party in 2.5 years last night, which might explain quite a lot of what goes on in the next hour. But enough of that. Honestly, listeners must get so bored of hearing, like, my health and George's knee. It's basically, it makes up about 40% of our content. Let's talk about Wimbledon. Let's talk about what happened yesterday. The ATP, at about 6 o'clock last night, which was quite annoying for those who were already in the pub, announced that they would strip Wimbledon of its ranking points. Of course, as you know, or you may not know, the Grand Slams have 2,000 points for the winners. That is double the ranking points of the Masters events that take place during the year, and it's a huge incentive for players to go and play these tournaments, quite apart from the money. The ATP statement said, the ability for players of any nationality to enter tournaments based on merit without discrimination is fundamental to our tour. The decision by Wimbledon to ban Russian and Belarusian players from competing in the UK this summer undermines this principle and the integrity of the ATP ranking system. It is also inconsistent with our rankings agreement. Absent a change in circumstances, it is with great regret and reluctance we see no option but to remove ATP ranking points from Wimbledon for 2022. George, a surprise?
I think it was once they'd kind of just announced the LTA stuff earlier in the week, there was a bit of a hint that, you know, this was a distinct possibility. I was pretty torn on Wimbledon's original decision, a bit on the fence and not kind of for one way or the other. This one, I'm a little bit. I kind of struggle to see how the ATP and WTA as player bodies can make this decision. Like, I don't see this kind of benefiting the player body as a whole. I kind of understand, you know, wanting to make a stance against Wimbledon, but I really can't imagine this is a very popular decision in the locker room. You know, there's been a few players kind of coming out, like Marton Fuchsvik, who's basically saying, cheers, I'm going to drop from 60 to 130 in the world, which, as we all know, that's a significant drop. That's, you know, getting into Masters events versus not even qualifying automatically for Grand Slams. So, you know, it's going to have big, wide-reaching problems. And I guess, you know, a lot of this kind of discussion's been about, is this fair for players? And, you know, Grand Slams, they have such a huge amount of points. They have such, you know, obviously the money will probably still stay, and I'm sure people will still go to Wimbledon and want to play it because of the money. You know, all the talk about lower ranked players skipping it to go and play challengers doesn't make sense to me when you can probably make more in the second round of qualifying at Wimbledon compared to like winning a challenger almost. But yeah, I mean, I just don't see this being a particularly beneficial decision. And to be honest, I'd be quite surprised if this is the end of the story, because I think there'll be a bit of a backlash and potentially some quite big tectonic plate shifts from the Grand Slams, who, as we all know, are really the most powerful bodies in tennis. And if they decide to kind of hit back at the tours, this really could split the whole thing wide open.
Calvin, I know you've been very forthright against the ban on Russian and Belarusian players. I mean, does this feel like a commensurate reaction by the tours?
Yeah, I think they've dug themselves a hole, and I think now it's just constantly digging further holes while trying to dig themselves out of it. I don't see, as George says, I can't imagine a single player would have backed this. I don't see why they would. It doesn't give any benefit to anybody. I don't see a way out of it for them. As a broken record, I keep saying this, but what do we do if the same thing's in place next year, which I think it probably will. I doubt this war ends within the next 12 months. So can we have 2 years of Wimbledon just being an exhibition money tournament? And you can say that the tours rely heavily on the slams, but I don't think it's necessarily as big as is being suggested. The tour goes on for about 40 weeks of the year, 45 weeks of the year. Only 8 of those weeks are taken up by the slams. They've got to play something else as well. And you think one of the things that tennis does right, much better than many other sports, is it has a coherent ranking system. The best player in the world tends to be the world number one, etc., etc. The second best player tends to be, give or take a couple of weeks every now and then. And we're in danger of messing that up. And if we are really in danger of having 2 ranking systems now, which is just absolute chaos, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm alluding to. I mean, I think, if the slams pull their events away and decide to have their own kind of ranking system or whatever, or their own kind of mini league, I actually don't think that would be the worst thing in the world for tennis, to kind of rip up the calendar and start again in some ways. This obviously wouldn't be the ideal starting point to do that, but I've always kind of felt there needed to be some kind of open heart surgery on the tennis tours as a whole. But I think the kind of wider point I'm making here is that, if you think about the slams as events, people don't go to them as necessarily like big tennis fans. People aren't going to go to Wimbledon this year and be like, well, I think it's just lost its soul because Cam Norrie's not going to get 180 ranking points for reaching the quarterfinals. You know what I mean? It is just a slightly different vibe at these sort of tournaments. I don't think it changes that much. And similarly, I don't think it changes that much for the players, because, there's still 2.5 million up for grabs or whatever for the winner. Maybe not that much, to be fair, 2.3, something like that. But yeah, I don't know. It is such a horrible mess now, and my favourite dig at the minute is that I'm still waiting for a statement from the PTPA, because I just think they're the most useless body, and I can't believe they can't even get a decent statement out on something as big as this within like 12 hours. But here we are.
Yeah, I think George touched on there what I was going to say, is that all this has done is highlight the problem of the ATP wanting this ideal world where they're both the players' union and the governing body, which is just impossible and it cannot work. They have to represent the players, but they also have to represent the tournaments and the ranking system. So what we've got here is a clear conflict, that they need to both represent the ranking system and the tournaments in one hand, and they need to represent the players in another. And you can't do it. You're going to have to compromise one of them. And this is why, it's why the players do really need a union. It's a shame the union that they had seems to be only interested in getting more money for the last 8 of any Grand Slam.
Are they even representing the tournaments in this one? I feel it feels to me like they're representing about a body of about 30 players.
They're representing the tour, I think. They're representing I guess they could argue that they're representing the normality of where we go after this, because then after Wimbledon, you got to remember that you come into Cincinnati in the US hardcourt swing, and you've then got the seedings, who qualifies and that kind of thing. Like, for example, Daniil Medvedev could be down at say 9 by the time we get to the US Open swing, and he's not the 9th best player. So you're going to be seeding him 9. He's going to be coming across Novak Djokovic in the last 16 of the US Open, and I think that's the problem.
Well, it's quite funny you say that, Calvin, because I think one of the, I use humorous lightly in this, but when you consider Wimbledon's decision was kind of to stop the possibility, or one part of it was to stop the possibility of Russian players kind of being heralded and, all that kind of sports washing stuff. One consequence of this decision, of course, is that Medvedev just jumped straight back to world number one because
he's virtually
Djokovic is the bloke
guaranteed
who's going to lose 2,000 points.
Just to clarify that, which I think, and I tweeted this morning, a slightly mad upshot of this decision is that the points from Wimbledon 2021 will fall off everyone's record when Wimbledon comes around and be replaced with nothing. So, that's why Martin Fucsovics, for example, is going to take such a hit, and that's why Daniil Medvedev is virtually guaranteed to be world number one in the first week of July. Which, of course, is, as you say, George, it would be funny if it weren't quite so ludicrous. The wild thing for me is that this was a decision taken ostensibly about fairness, and that's what the statement says. It says it's not fair to Russian and Belarusian players, but equally, as you say, it's now creating some unfairness on sort of a random group of players who did well at Wimbledon last year and are all of a sudden just going to lose, or a random group of players who expect to do well at Wimbledon this year. I know we don't always like Nick Kyrgios, but he probably is going to make the third or fourth round of Wimbledon, and that's a big deal for someone who's ranked 75 in the world. And all of a sudden, he's going to make, third round prize money, 160 odd grand, but, he's not going to get any points, which otherwise he should expect to get.
Yeah, these are transformative tournaments, beyond the stars. Someone, a qualifier, makes it to round 3 of Wimbledon, that completely changes their career. That basically keeps them in the top 100 for the next year and guarantees them kind of getting slam points, slam prize money the whole time. As I say, I can't see many players turning down the opportunity to go and play at Wimbledon because the prize money is so big, and is ultimately why a lot of these lower ranked players want to get into these tournaments, is to fund the rest of their years, essentially. It is that kind of important. But you'd be pretty upset if you had, I'm thinking someone like Bosic van der Zandschulp last year, for example. What did he get to? Like quarterfinals of the US Open, fourth round. If he'd played that tournament and not had ranking points, he'd still be in qualifying for the next slam. As it is, he's now seeded for the French Open because that was a springboard for him to go forward.
I was doing the draw yesterday, and I was just on Thursday. Sorry, I was blown away. I was like, Bosic van der Zandschulp is a seeded player at a Grand Slam. Literally like a year ago, in my head, he was basically a meme because he was this like big bloke, big serve, and hilarious name that I was never going to be able to spell or pronounce. And now he's like a legitimate tennis player. And as you say, George, these Grand Slams are springboards. Yes, they're massive financial boons, but the ranking points really do matter. It feels unfair. I think, Calvin, you summed it up well, that it's a giant mess. What do we think the next step is? Like, what's the reaction to the reaction?
I don't know. What I do wonder is, when Wimbledon made this decision, do you think they thought about this? Do you think they thought the ATP could come and take the ranking points away? Because I don't think they do. I think it was just they rushed into it. They wanted to make a big statement, which I'm sure the intentions were good, but these problems weren't unforeseeable, that they were going to happen. What in regards to what the next step is, I don't think they can go back to freezing the ranking points, as I was saying in our WhatsApp group this morning, because I think all that does is it swaps the unluckiness, I don't know if that's a word, onto another group of players. Like you can defend from last year, but then say, for example, Carlos Alcaraz could go, wait a minute, why does Matteo Berrettini get the points from Wimbledon last year and I don't get any? He's in no sort of form. He's not even playing. I'm playing, and I'm fancying my chances of winning this slam. So the players who may come into it in good form this year, the big servers, they may think, I've got a chance of picking some points up here. Why should Martin Fucsovics stay at 60 in the world when half of his points are from this one tournament? Like, I don't think he would have made I don't know what he made last year, maybe quarters, I guess.
Fourth round, I think.
Last 16, yeah.
Hell of a quiz question, that.
Yeah. But, they may go, somebody may go, why should he have those points? Why does he have them for 2 years? Because of some mad decision that was taken by some rich people in a boardroom in South London.
There's a few kind of things, I guess, from these statements that have kind of shone through, haven't they? That the ATP and WTA have basically said, Wimbledon took a unilateral decision. They're really unhappy that there was less kind of dialogue with everyone else, which I think is a totally fair point, to be honest. That is just a general problem in tennis, that you've got all these massive bodies and no one actually kind of talking with each other. And we had it with the French Open during the pandemic, didn't we, where they just were like, oh, our tournament can't happen, we're just going to drop this in September without telling anyone, and you're just going to deal with it. So it has long been a problem. In terms of other next steps, there was a bit of an ominous point of Wimbledon's statement where they were saying, we're going to take our time to respond. We're in talks with the rest of the Grand Slams. That implies to me there will be some significant hit back from them. And I do think there is quite a big power shift if the slams do come together, which is by no means a guarantee, don't get me wrong, but they've got shared interests to protect, and the tours, it's rare for them to go after one slam significantly for fear of the Grand Slam board and what could happen if they lash back. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
But what can they do? They
can form a new set of rankings. They can pull away. They can remove their ranking points from the tour. They can keep their revenue, not support the tours.
Could they remove their ranking points from the tour?
Well, they could set up their new ranking points, for example. That's a genuine thing that's been discussed in the back rooms for years.
For 8 weeks, for 4 tournaments.
But then they'd launch other events around it. They'd literally be a tear away. This is genuinely been spoken about in the back rooms for a long time for people who are unsettled by the calendar. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'd be very surprised if it did happen, because ultimately I think everyone in tennis is a bit of a pussycat when it comes down to it, which is almost why I'm slightly surprised we've got to this stage. But it'll be they've got big significant threats they can use against the tour, and I think underestimate the value of the slams at your peril. They really are such vital cogs in these in the tennis ecosystem.
I think that would depend though on the other slams agreeing with what Wimbledon have done. Like we don't know if the US Open think, the people who run the US Open might think, we're not banning Russian players. So then if they're not going to do that, they think, why should we take a hit on that?
I'd say there's kind of two sides to that. They might not necessarily agree with the decision, but they'd agree with the rights for a country to make that sort of decision. But the idea that in ripping away points from a slam is like a direct attack on the Grand Slam kind of entities. I don't know. I mean, I'm not involved in these conversations. So I can't speak accurately to what they're saying. So it's always hard to say.
Again, though, I'll say, and just quickly, because I say this all the time, what do we think happens if this war is still going on in a year's time? Is Wimbledon not having ranking points next year?
Yeah, I think probably Wimbledon back down.
But then you've got to ask. Then questions will be asked, right? Why did we waste last year? What's changed?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. They've created, as you say, Calvin, a very difficult position for themselves to back out of. And when you're at the bottom of a hole, stop digging. But I think what's interesting, and we kind of talked about this last time, and I don't want to go on about it too much, is that everyone, I think we've all spoken to people who were either involved in the decision or know people who were by the board, and they were absolutely convinced that it was the right decision. That there was no real semblance of a dissenting voice within the board. I think it was kind of mooted. They talked about it, and really the only difficulties were how they would enact it, and how they would cope with it and how they would spin it. I don't think really anyone on that board thought, I think this is a bit much, lads. And of course they had governmental backing, which probably does make it easier for them to make that decision, because they think, well, we've got the British government on side, we'll be all right.
Just worth saying on the flip side to that, I mean, you've got Bianca Andrescu coming out saying the players weren't consulted by the tours on this kind of decision as well, which just feels...
that's also not true. But, well, it's sort of true. I mean, I messaged a couple of players. There was this WTA call. I think that was on Wednesday, Calvin. I think you might be able to back me up on that. And they spoke to some players on the WTA about what was going on. It seemed that the WTA were a little bit dismissive of some players' views. I messaged 4 or 5 different WTA players of various different statuses, and none of them were on that call. So it doesn't feel like it was like an all hands meeting, to use a term from the business world. I mean, the obvious thing would have been to poll the players, and this is we come back to having a players' union, because what you should do is have a union, you sit down, you have an emergency meeting, you poll the players on what the reaction would be, and then you take that to the world. And, that was what would happen if at my office, if something happened, the National Union of Journalists chapter for the newspaper would call a meeting, we'd talk about it, and then we'd have a vote on our response. And
ultimately, they'd never come to this decision if they did that. I don't think. I think I'd be astonished if you got more than 3% support from the player body. The majority would be Russian and Belarusian.
Yeah. I think that's probably fair. I mean, Dan Evans came out yesterday and said that it didn't seem right or fair. I know Stu Fraser in the Times had an anonymous British player calling it effing ridiculous, or words to that effect. I think it's fair to say that the player support for it would have been pretty minimal. But it does also seem to me that what's the player support been like, Calvin? You'll know, you talk to a lot of players. What was the player support like for the ban in the first place?
I would say somewhere between apathy and they didn't agree with it. I didn't speak to anybody, I don't think, off the top of my head, who said, yeah, definitely the right decision.
Yeah.
Again, I'll come back to it. Tennis players are independent contractors, and a lot of these guys are friends with a lot of the Russian players. They know how closely connected or not they are to that sort of setup. They know that they almost en masse, I would say, probably entirely en masse, don't agree with what's happening in Ukraine, and they can't say anything about it. And they feel like their mates are probably just being punished for no reason.
The one group we probably should mention who are clearly against it are the Ukrainian players, and they are furious with the tours. The people like Dolgopolov, Kostyuk, they're all...
I imagine Sergei Stakhovsky's not very impressed.
Big statements saying this is like a pro-Russian move, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily that, but that it's easy to forget that I suppose when they're putting it in the context of what's happening in their country, this all feels fairly small and insignificant, and it's kind of hard to move away from that from their perspective. So when we're talking about the Russians being hard done by, I think they need to be mentioned as well.
I thought it was a bit much. I can't remember if it was from Stakhovsky or Dolgopolov. One of them started having a go at the Russian players because they hadn't come out and condemned the regime and this kind of thing. And as we've discussed, they cannot do that. Let's not get into having a go at the Russian players here. They're, I would say, the innocent party in this, as are the Ukrainians, obviously. Ukrainians in general, not just tennis players. The Russian players, as far as I know, haven't said anything that they should be criticised for. And I think one or two of the Ukrainian players were starting to get into that kind of area of having a pop at the Russians.
Which is kind of like, and you're right, and I agree with you, but that's kind of inevitable. Like when you have war between two countries, and like it's pretty passionate, and it's kind of how the what's it called, the phony war kind of works, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember on that. I think it was the '92 Wimbledon, and Monica Seles and Goran Ivanisevic refused to dance together if they won it. There was an instance where I think they both could have won it, and they'd made it clear that they weren't going to do. It's a tradition that the winner of the men's and women's dance together on the night at the ball, and because it was obviously the time of the Yugoslavian war, they'd made it clear that they wouldn't be doing that.
I love that dancing together at the ball is like the international incident. That's as much as Wimbledon can tolerate when it comes to war.
As it happened, they both lost in the final, so it didn't make
any difference. Just a brief point that was raised by Matt Willis on Twitter, which probably means Calvin didn't see it. So saying some historical context for this kind of Wimbledon versus the ATP spat is the 1973 boycott, which again involved Yugoslavia and was a sort of political move. 12 of the 16 seeds boycotted Wimbledon 1973. Do you know what happened to attendances? It was the second highest attendance in Wimbledon's history at the time. 300,000 people turned up. As you mentioned, George, the reality is that people don't really care about ranking points. It has impact, clearly, on the sport and probably would end up being something people cared about in the long run, but it's not going to change who goes to Wimbledon. They've already paid their tickets.
Yeah, well, quite. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, the tickets are all totally sold out. So, I mean, from Wimbledon's perspective, it's a bit annoying for them, but I really don't see the players not turning out there's not going to be an issue with crowds. It's not that big a deal for them. As Calvin says, if this drags on into a few years and becomes a big problem, or if there's, some sort of bizarre move to attempt Wimbledon not to be a slam next year, which, is definitely not going to happen. So that's a stupid thing to say anyway, but it's just not going to affect them in the long run, as far as I can see.
What does not being a slam look like? Like what? It's not like
this is Djokovic's long theory of taking the slams to Abu Dhabi and stuff, isn't it? Where they just follow the money and have big new events. I mean, it is happening in sports, isn't it? You're taking franchises and matches to different places, etc. It could, in theory, happen to tennis. I don't want to, James. I promise you, I do not want to. I'm firmly against that.
I mean, it would be quite funny if, Wimbledon are obviously planning this massive redevelopment. They're building, another stadium court in the park and a whole load more outside courts. It'd be quite funny if they finally finished that and then somehow lost Grand Slam status and just have these grass tennis courts that they don't really have anything to do with. Although it would be kind of tragic.
That is, I mean, it's not about Wimbledon, but it's one potential knock-on effect from this that we've probably not really touched upon about kind of the LTA side of things, because obviously they've kind of, at the minute, kind of come out scot-free in terms of keeping their points, because the Russians can go to other events, etc. But there is potential knock-on effects regarding Queens and stuff. There's big talks around an ATP Masters. Gaudenzi's very keen to have that, and Queens was kind of thought to be in the driving seat with LTA chiefs kind of lobbying Gaudenzi earlier this year, and this you have to think really will not have helped their cause very much. I can see that going to Halle, and that'd be a big problem for Queens. They'd have to accept lower status. They'd have to move to a different week, fewer points probably. So that's just another kind of sideshow going on in British tennis. I'm sure we've covered this before, but it bears repeating. What's the kind of deal with Queens? If they wanted to make Queens a Masters, do they have the kind of requisite stadiums? Because you're obviously required to have a certain number of capacity stadiums. I would have thought that the centre court might be big enough, but they've got no other court with enough seats on it.
So much smaller than Monte Carlo?
Yeah, I think it's doable, basically. My understanding is there has been pitches to do it, and they think they can do it.
I mean, presumably they could just change the rules. I mean, they can do what they want. It's their tour. I'm pretty sure you're required to have 2 courts over a certain capacity, but presumably if they wanted to have a Masters event at Queens, they just could, and no one would bat an eyelid, presumably.
I thought so.
Speaking of Queens,
tennis care, don't they?
Speaking of Queens, and since we're talking about Wimbledon, we might as well cover a little bit of the grass court season that is starting next week in earnest. Andy Murray is going to start at the Surbiton Challenger, which I'm not going to be here because it's in the second week of Roland Garros, and I'm going to be in Paris. But I'm really looking forward to seeing. Obviously every seat will be full when Murray plays on what I think quite generously is termed the grandstand court at Surbiton. I imagine there'll be people on step ladders and peering out of windows just to get a glimpse of him. Calvin, you know Surbiton very well, I'm sure. I mean, I don't really know how they're going to cope with it.
Yeah, it's in the middle of a sort of living area, I guess you would say. It's not got the
residential is the word.
Residential, that's it. Yeah, lost my mind there. Yeah, like a living room.
Yeah,
it's not in a big.
Just in
room.
Someone's living room.
Yeah, I mean it's not got the easiest access, but then again, they've had. I think in the past they've had some pretty big players play there. Players that have gone out of the US Open, French Open early.
Right.
I think they'll be ready, and yeah, I don't think it'd be a massive problem. It's a big club, but there's a lot of once you're in there. There's a lot of space.
Right. Okay. Are you surprised that he's gone and played that? I mean, he's obviously going to play a lot of grass court tournaments if he.
No, I think I felt pretty sure he was always going to play it. I think it's one of those that it's a challenger in theory, but anybody who doesn't fancy winning the French Open tends to play it or tends to consider it. They may not even always play it.
Right. There's also news that Jack Draper has got a wild card for Queens. He, of course, would have liked to be playing in the French Open, but pulled out of qualifying with a minor leg injury. but he was pretty much back on court within 48 hours of pulling out, so clearly quite minor. Had he made the French main draw, I imagine he might not have needed a wild card to Queens. But George, he had a great run there last year. Of course, he beat Yannick Sinner, which is a decent result for anyone, albeit Sinner doesn't love the grass. But I mean, he could do some real damage there this year, couldn't he?
Yeah, he definitely could. It's a bit of a shame he didn't make the French, to be honest. I don't know exactly how bad his physical status was, but guys like Jack are capable of winning matches at slams, and that can really, as we've kind of talked about with Wimbledon, that can really boost your career. And he's not going to get a free shot at Wimbledon ranking points this year, which is maybe where he's thinking about prioritising.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. Actually, that's a massive bin for him. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess if this decision had come out maybe 3 weeks earlier, he might have tried to push himself through French qualies. That's complete speculation, of course, but that this will feel like a bit of a disappointing period for Jack, I imagine, in terms of he's ready to really climb up the rankings and be a regular part of the tour. I think the way he's playing. So yeah, hopefully he just wins Queens or something and bolts there anyway. But
yeah, it would be great if he won Queens, that's for sure. Next, we're going to talk about the French Open draw, some fantasy tennis, and whether Daniil Medvedev is really going to... I mean, he really could go out in the first round.
This episode is brought to you by Cheetos Deja Tu Huella. Deja Tu Huella means leave your mark, and that's exactly what Latinos are doing all across the country. They're rewriting the rules and pushing the boundaries in their communities to leave their own unique mark. They use their gift, their superpoder, to make an impact, whether it's through art, music, fashion, food, or something else. And Cheetos will celebrate what they're doing by shining a light on their transformative power. The Deja Tu Huella program celebrates those leaving their mark in Latino communities. You can also celebrate by checking out the new podcast, Batman Unburied, on Spotify. Batman Unburied is presented by Cheetos Deja Tu Huella. Visit Batman Unburied on Spotify to learn more.
It's so nice out there in the Mexican markets where chilies stretch in the sun, high in the mountain air between backcountry skiers and kids doing the first snowplow, or next to the pool after a long day of forgetting what day it is. We're all here to get out there and come home more us than us that went away. And when you save on travel as an Expedia member, you can travel even more. It's so nice out there. So let's go. Expedia. Made to travel. Terms apply. See site for details.
Skip the hassles of traffic aboard Amtrak. Go from city to city with ease as you enjoy no middle seats and plenty of legroom. Plus, with fewer carbon emissions than driving, you can travel with a clear conscience. So kick back, relax, and travel sustainably aboard Amtrak. Book in advance and save up to 50% at Amtrak.com. 21-day advanced purchase required. Blackout dates apply. Subject to change in availability.
It's me, the sun-soaked tropical hotel, looking for a companion who enjoys short walks to sandy beaches and exotic bird sightings. Must love a spontaneous voyage on a privately owned catamaran. My strengths include ocean and jungle views, your choice, plus the occasional ukulele serenade. My only weakness? You'll never want to leave me. Download the hotel's app to find me, your perfect somewhere.
Now we can actually talk about some tennis. Apologies if you didn't want to hear the first half hour of wranglings between Wimbledon and the ATP, but it is the big story in town at the moment. However, hopefully tomorrow, Sunday, the French Open gets underway and we can start talking about tennis. I am genuinely very excited about the French Open, not just because I'm going for the first time for the whole fortnight. I've never been to Roland Garros, so I'm pretty excited about that one. And one of the joys of living in London is it's literally a 2-hour train journey away, so there's not even much hassle with flying or jet lag. The draw was made on Thursday, and it, well, I don't know if it left us disappointed, but it certainly left us with some taste buds tingling. The top half of the men's draw really being the headline. Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz all in there. Djokovic slated for a quarter-final meeting with Rafael Nadal and then potentially a semi-final meeting with Carlos Alcaraz. The bottom half of the draw, Daniil Medvedev's half, wide open. Stefanos Tsitsipas is in there, Casper Ruud, Andrei Rublev, Yannick Sinner. I mean, any one of these people could make a semi-final, if not a final, quite frankly. George, how? I mean, it is wide open, isn't it? There's no obvious semi-final or final from the bottom half, is there?
I think you've got to back Tsitsipas for the final at the moment. The caveat being, Lorenzo Mussetti's a really, really tough first round. That is not a player you really want to be running into that early. He does have a winning record against him, though, so I'm sure he'll fancy his chances. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, Medvedev is in no form because he's just not played. So, I mean, he lost to Richard Gasquet last week, which is not a great result, really, for anyone, really, these days. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. Casper Ruud will really fancy his chances as well. He'll be pleased to be in that half. He's another guy who's been in pretty good form on the clay over the last few years. I'm sure we'll come on to fantasy in a bit. I've basically just taken a few random blokes from the bottom half of the draw, just in kind of hit and hope fashion. Goffin, he's played a few good matches, won a title in Marrakesh, and then gave Nadal a really good scare in Madrid. So, he's maybe one who might, and he's been there and done it before in terms of being a Grand Slam quarterfinalist. That's sometimes what it comes down to. Marin Cilic was another one I was vaguely considering on the same point.
I mean, that is a real indicator of just how open the draw is, that you're considering Marin Cilic to have a deep run at the French Open. Yeah. It's not exactly a surface that suits his game. I mean, he has made 2 quarterfinals there, but given that he's been in the final of every other slam, it's clearly his weakest one. Yeah, and the other name I'll kind of put in there who's having a really good year, and actually I did pick him in the air, is Kesmanovich. He's been in really, really good form this year, playing some great stuff. He's due to meet Medvedev round 3, but there's no guarantee Medvedev will get there at the minute. For what it's worth, I probably think it will just be a Tsitsipas-Medvedev semi-final because Medvedev is just so good regardless of what the surface is, and it's not the worst draw in the world, but yeah, worth taking a few gambles if you are playing our fantasy game, I think. I mean, Daniil Medvedev basically said that he wasn't going to win the French Open because he has only played one match since having surgery on a hernia problem after the American hardcourt swing. He went out to Geneva and he lost 6-2, 7-6 to Richard Gasquet, as you mentioned. He's got Facundo Bagnis in the first round. Is that how you say his name? I apologise if I've butchered that. And then either Ricardas Berankis or Laszlo Djere, the Serbian, in the second round. And then, as you mentioned, Kesmanovich in the third round. Calvin, we often talk about players who need matches and players who don't need matches, but I suppose when it comes to injury, it's just pot luck, is it, to see how fit you can get in a week or two?
Yeah, I'd say so. First on that, I saw some stat in the week, which was absolutely blew my mind, that Richard Gasquet, with that win, has now beaten in his career a player ranked in every ranking position from 1 to 100.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, who's worked that out? How do you even work that out?
He's been waiting for that day for about 3 years.
He still hasn't beaten
I'm
the world
missing one
2.
in my Gasquet bingo.
Like the old Panini sticker book. Just every slam he's hoping that Gasquet draws the second seed. But I just can't understand how anyone has ever managed to figure that out. But anyway, I'd agree with Medvedev. He's not going to win the French Open. It's not on his best surface anyway. But he'll want some matches in, although the question what he wants matches in for now. But he strangely said he's going to play the grass, didn't he? He's going to play all the grass.
3 tournaments, I think.
Yeah, is he playing Halle, Rosmalen, and somewhere else maybe?
Which makes me wonder, like, do they still think there's a outside chance, very outside chance, that they end up playing Wimbledon? Because I don't see why.
Well, I mean,
points, I guess, are more important to him.
But points, cash, like keeping
doesn't
active.
Need cash. Doesn't need the cash though.
Well, but I mean that's.
But I mean, but what I'm saying is, coming back from an injury, there'd be an argument for looking at it and going, look, I'm coming back from this hernia. My strongest period is the US hardcourt swing. I might just take an extra 5 weeks off here and just get ready for the hardcourts.
Yeah, it does seem like an unusual. But I said I potentially would have skipped the French Open if I were him as well, because realistically he's had one match. He's only just back. Yeah. But I suppose it's all points and it's just match practice. But yeah, it does seem like a a strange decision. I mentioned the top half and Djokovic Nadal as a potential quarterfinal, Calvin. I mean, if you were Novak Djokovic, I mean, obviously you want to avoid Nadal at all costs, but prefer to play him in the quarters rather than, say, the semis?
I wouldn't think Djokovic. I don't think it makes much difference for Djokovic. Although there was that interesting thing that came out in the week, wasn't there? That I'd seen somebody said that they'd seen him a few years ago, and he was watching a match in the locker room of Federer playing, and Federer ended up winning, and Djokovic was furious because he was going to have to play him later. Was it you,
George's story? Yeah.
That was my story.
I'm
so glad you think it was interesting, Calvin. Last week there didn't seem to be much of a reaction, but
probably made
sharing my stories back.
Yeah, so I mean, initially you'd think he doesn't care. I think quarterfinals, semi-finals, it doesn't make any difference. To be fair.
In terms of Carlos Alcaraz's draw, he has a lucky loser, Juan Ignacio Londero, in the first round, which feels like the best possible draw. Then potentially Ramos Vinolas, Sebastian Korda, Cam Norrie maybe in the fourth round. But really the quarterfinal matchup, with Alexander Zverev, if they both get there, is the one that we're looking to. I mean, obviously he's beaten him, and he quite frankly battered him in Madrid. How representative do we think that is, Calvin? I mean, obviously Zverev had come off that 5 a.m. finish.
Yeah. I think that Alcaraz is better than Zverev. I don't think there's any question of that.
You just think he's a better player?
Yeah, I think he's comfortably better now. I'd be surprised if it happened. I don't see what situations that Zverev would beat him in.
George?
I think I agree. I think Alcaraz is better, but I wouldn't write off Zverev. Zverev's still one of the very top guys in the world who can win big matches. As we said, in slams, maybe that hasn't quite happened yet. But Alcaraz, he's still not been beyond a Grand Slam quarterfinal. So,
he's only played about 3.
I know, but we still can't sit around and say, oh, Alcaraz is definitely going to win this tournament. He's got, if he gets into a few meaty 5-setters earlier in the tournament, is he going to be able to hold it physically and mentally? Probably.
Yeah, really question his physicality.
Yeah.
He looks like a bloke who really struggles with that.
Come on, guys, I'm trying to create some intrigue here.
No, but on top of that, what I just said though, like I was going to come to that look at Zverev's record in slams. What part of any of us thinks that Zverev's beating Alcaraz in the latter stage of a slam? Has he still never beaten anyone in the top 10 in the world in a slam?
That's almost certainly true. Or he might have one, but yeah, he as you say, like he also seems to have a massive problem with nerves at the moment. Like we all think that he gets nervous at Grand Slams, and he clearly does. He drops sets. He gets stuck into massive 5-setters with people that he should never stuck in. Obviously, his record at slams until the last 2 years was poor. And when he was playing in Munich, and I keep going back to this, but I've just never really heard a player talk about it. He said he was so nervous. He lost to Holger Rune, and he hadn't played in Germany in front of fans, I think, for 3 years since before the pandemic. And he said he was so nervous. And I just think that the best guys, they say they get nervous, but they usually say it after they win. And, they don't actually really seem to... Yeah, they get tight. We know Federer gets tight. We know Djokovic can get tight. But they usually come through it. And I just increasingly feel like Zverev has basically a bottle issue. I mean, the second serve is the obvious point, but...
The French is probably statistically his best tournament, I'd imagine, in terms of he seems to post the most regular quarters and
semis. He's a good clay court player.
There. He is a good clay court player. I mean, I think, and the nerves is an interesting thing because we've got this really funny change of balance in this situation now where guys like Zverev, Tsitsipas, Medvedev to a slightly lesser degree, seeing as he's always already broken the Grand Slam barrier, but it's almost like that generation's suddenly been disregarded for Alcaraz, and they're kind of the underdogs entering matches with him. I don't know if he'd be nervous in that match. I don't think he goes into that match thinking, "God, I'm the massive favourite here." I think, and that may suit him. He's had some good. I know he's lost a lot of these matches, as Gavin said, but he's had some good slam matches where he's played really well against guys like Djokovic over the last couple of years, where he's pushed him really deep. US Open, for example. He's had some bad Grand Slam matches as well. Don't get me wrong. The US Open final against Team stands out, but he still won 2 sets in that, so he's could be worse.
Strangely, I'd say the player who I'd most think he'd beat in the top 10. I'd probably back him to beat Ruud, to be fair. But after Ruud, the player I'm most for him to beat is Djokovic. If he played him in a slam, his record against him is so good, and he's been close with him in slams a couple of times. I think it's just quite a nice matchup for him, and Djokovic doesn't really fancy playing him.
Seeing as we're on the topic of Zverev, I quite enjoyed some kind of quotations from him this week where he was kind of running the rule over the draw. I guess we've all sort of started picking up Alcaraz ahead of Nadal now, which seems almost like blasphemy in some ways. But Zverev was saying he's been watching Rafa and he's got an extra 20 miles an hour on his forehand or whatever. He's suddenly moving amazingly. I mean, this is a court that this guy is so good on. Are we really categorically ruling him out at this stage, or can he come through Djokovic?
I mean, I think Djokovic is going to win the French Open, so which I know isn't controversial given that he's world number 1 and top seed. It's a bit of a Belshaw prediction that one. But I mean, I think it will come down to genuinely, and it's amazing to say about Rafa, but with the injury that he's got, this it's called Muller-Weiss syndrome, and I'm very grateful to Eleni, one of our regular listeners, for breaking it down for me in 280 characters. It's pretty impressive. And it's a very rare kind of degenerative bone disease in his foot. And I genuinely think it depends who can take, like, almost like body punches in boxing, like who can take something out of him in the early rounds. I don't think he'll lose in the first 4 rounds, but like Botic might take some sets off him in the 3rd round. If Riley Opelka's playing very well at the moment, and if Opelka has a good serving day, it's hard to see him not getting at least a set off Rafa if they come into the 4th round.
Is it hard to see?
The thing is with Rafa,
he's got an elite serve.
You'll know if that happens, then I'll think Rafa's not winning it, because Rafa at the French just cleans up in the 1st round. He's you don't put past him to have a 6-love, 6-1, 6-1 in the first 2 rounds.
The amazing thing about those matches is they always last like almost 3 hours as well. They must have the record for the longest bagel sets in French Open history.
Well, he had that record. I think it was, on the top of my head, I'll say 2014, but might not be, where he didn't lose a set in the tournament, but he only won 51% of the points played, which was remarkable.
That's bizarre. He's so clutch. Let's move on to the women's draw, because we haven't really touched it. Iga Swiatek, of course, the top seed. I think she'll be reasonably happy, although her 4th round matchup is potentially Jelena Ostapenko, who has a 3-0 record and is the last person to beat Iga Swiatek in Dubai back in February. George, you're looking quizzically. Do you actually think it's quite a poor draw?
No, I was just thinking, is it Ostapenko or Halep?
It is Ostapenko or Halep. Neither of which are a good matchup, if you ask me.
No, I think I'd probably back Halep to get there over Ostapenko personally, particularly with Calvin's favourite coach working his magic.
Yeah, that's gone off a bit, hasn't it? Since he rejuvenated her career, according to some. That's the last couple of weeks haven't quite backed that up.
Yeah, but the women's, I mean, I just can't look past Swiatek, to be honest, at the minute.
Well, if you could try and look past it, the other 127 players in the draw, otherwise it'd be quite a short segment. Good, yes, on Jabeur. Named another one.
I picked Coco Gauff, and my team name is To Goff or To Goffhound.
That's not bad. Coco Gauff, incidentally, graduated from high school this week, which is quite impressive, given that she's also being a professional tennis player.
Definitely winning the tournament then off the back of heavy celebrations.
I mean, heavy celebrations appears to be posing in front of the Eiffel Tower while wearing a mortarboard, which I suppose so. I was quite surprised to see Barbara Krejcikova at the bottom of the draw. Not because, I mean, that is where the number 2 seed goes, but I was quite surprised to see her there at all, really. She hasn't played, I think, since the hard courts. She's had what I believe to be an elbow problem.
Great draw for her. I mean, bloody hell. I mean, if she is fit, which I severely doubt, but if she was in kind of fitness and form, you'd really back her chances to get to the final. And the bottom half is crazy open, possibly even more than the men's, to be honest.
Well, I think it's a bit like the men's in that it has a clear, like, Like, Ons Jabeur should make the final. She's playing really well. She's a brilliant player. She has no one really of note. Like, these are the seeds in her quarter: Petra Kvitova, Angelique Kerber, and Emma Raducanu. Now, Kerber's having a horrible season at the moment. We all know who Petra Kvitova is and what to expect from her, which is not a huge amount. And then Raducanu is both not fit and not great on clay, and is a kind of false seed because it really should be about world number 50. And then you look at her. What you make your face?
I thought she's top half though, isn't she, Jabeur?
Nope, she is section 5. She's top of the bottom half.
Top of the bottom. Oh, I've just misread the draw then. Oh, you're totally right. You're totally right.
Great.
That's fine then. That's better than I thought it was then. That's not so bad.
Calvin, I assume you would pick Swiatek over the field.
Yeah, I can't see anybody else winning it, to be honest. Although the women's tournament, isn't it? So I'd be very surprised if it's the nature of tennis, to be honest. If you look at it, I mean, you'd think it's got to be Alcaraz or Djokovic in the men's top half, Tsitsipas in the bottom half, Swiatek in the top half, Jabeur in the second half, in the bottom half. But I guarantee you, in 2 weeks' time on Saturday, we won't be talking about those finals. Somebody will lose.
Yeah. I always sometimes play a bit of a game with myself, which is where I just pick a random name and think, I wonder if she'll make a semi, because it's entirely possible. The one I've just sort of randomly scrolled to is Alison Van Oytefank, which I've always liked, partly because it's a great name, and yeah, she's Belgian, which would be funny. And to be fair, she did make a quarterfinal of the French, admittedly, about a decade ago.
You've got to stick a quid on that now, James. You've probably got that 500 to 1 for that.
Speaking of betting and the French Open, Iga Swiatek is an even money favourite. Now, for people who don't understand betting, that basically means she is better than a 50% chance of winning the French Open. Now, in a boxing match, if someone's even money, 50%, 2-horse race, yeah, fine. But to be a 50% chance of winning in a 128-horse race, it's insane to me. I mean, I've not been able to find out whether there's ever been a shorter. I'd be surprised if there has ever been a shorter prize favourite for a Grand Slam, because, I mean, I don't know, Federer, Wimbledon, like in peak Federer, possibly, but
it's also a great bet, isn't it? It's buying money.
I mean, I suppose I said this. I mean, bet responsibly and don't gamble more than you can afford to lose, but I said, having seen even money Swiatek, I would take, 6 players at sort of between 10 and 20 to 1, because I just feel like, as you kind of said, Calvin, someone's going to lose. And it might well be Swiatek. Like, it could happen. And if she loses, I think there are only about 5 or 6 women who could win it, to be perfectly honest. So, yeah, I would probably take those against Swiatek, albeit that the most likely, if you have to pick one, the most likely answer is Swiatek. If I can pick 6 who aren't Swiatek, I think that's more likely.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, the betting, I still can't get my head around the idea that Alcaraz is the same odds as Novak Djokovic. I just can't get my head around that. Like, I know he's been brilliant this year, but, we're talking about, even in Swiatek's case, she's a one-time Grand Slam champion. She's only been to one final, Yeah. She's evens if she gets past the quarterfinals for me, but she's not consistently gone past the 4th round of every slam. It's far from a given, even if she's ridiculously good and kind of gone to a new planet this year. I think there's always a bit of recency bias, but I'll always take a Djokovic over Alcaraz at this stage, given the history and knowing how to navigate these tournaments. They're totally different from the tour events.
George, this is basically a fantasy tennis question, but I can phrase it as just a normal life question. Who's your dark horse in the WTA tournament to make the semi-finals?
I don't know. I haven't got it based on semi-finals. I can read you my fantasy team, though, if you like. In that,
great.
Give you my 10 options. So I've gone Djokovic over Tsitsipas, because Tsitsipas just feels like a bit of a gimme to get to the final and was tempting. Novak's got a bit of but as you say, James, I think he'll win the tournament. So Djokovic, gone Alcaraz over Rafa, because just seems like he'll get to the semis. Gone Kesmanovich. I think Cilic was my only other player I was really considering in that bracket, which
is that the 17 to 32 seeds?
Yeah. David Goffin
So this is your unseeded player. So any
unseeded player, bit of form, bottom of half, and then I've got Gombos as my qualifier.
Norbert Gombos. Is there a better name in tennis?
He loves a cheeky qualifying winner. I've got a feeling he might be playing another qualifier.
He's playing lucky loser Pedro Cachin.
Yeah. So you're kind of hoping he'll win that. I wasn't particularly taken by any of the qualifiers.
For those who don't know the scoring system, effectively you get a point for every match win, but it's weighted depending on which player wins. So qualifiers, I think off the top of my head, get 3 points for a win. If your unseeded player wins, you get 2 points for a win. Your seeded players get 1, and your top 4 player gets half a point for a win. And then once you get into the second week, there are bonus points for each win at that stage. Talk to me about your WTA team, George.
Yeah, no question about the first two, Swiatek and Jabeur. I'd expect probably 90% picks of both of them from the field, to be honest.
Early signs are exactly that.
I've reluctantly gone for Coco Gauff as my next seed.
That.
She's just got a decent draw, bottom half. If we're talking about someone kind of potentially seeing the way through, she could meet Muguruza round 3, but
I think that's
I think draw. Yeah, I'm not 100% convinced she's there. I just quite like her section of the draw. I think she's good on clay typically, even if she's not in kind of top form. And I think it's a good section, so she's got a chance. And then I've taken Bianca Andrescu, who I think is picking up into decent form. Another unseeded player, not a terrible draw, kind of in the bottom half as well, I think. So yes, I've gone for her. And then my qualifier, I've gone for Donna Vekic, who...
Donna Vekic, or as an old colleague of mine calls her, Donna. I've no idea why. He just always did, and it made me laugh.
You know, that's a player who's been top 30 in the world. I think she's playing another qualifier round indeed. 1.
She's playing Mirjam Bjorklund, the Swede.
Who I don't think it'll be an easy match, to be fair. And, Vekic isn't in amazing form, but she's someone who is capable of a 4th round run. And that wouldn't be a great surprise. She's someone who's done that.
I mean,
before.
It would be, because she's then got to beat Anna Samova and then Sakari.
Easy, no problem, James. No problem. She'll beat an injured Osaka in round 2. No.
With Sakari's luck this year, she's probably going to get injured as well. I mean, she's the last 3 months. She basically goes from injury to illness to injury. Yeah. Very interesting, George. If you want to play fantasy tennis and beat George, you have until Sunday morning to get your team in. Have I cut you off short?
No, I was just going to say, I have to say that I think since we've been doing this, the French is always the one I feel least confident about, and it's the same again. Sometimes, it just falls quite nicely, the draws. I swear the French just always falls really awkwardly, and I'm just not confident in any one I've picked. So, yeah, good chances to beat me.
Head to @LoveTennisPod Twitter to find the link to the form to enter. It's multiple choice, so if you don't know who you want to pick, then just head over there and I don't know, pin stick if you want. You can't make changes to your team once the tournament starts, so it's not like fantasy football where you got to check it every day. What a nightmare that is. But you literally pick the team, and then I'll post the spreadsheet on our Twitter so you can follow along. I'll also put the links in the description to the podcast, this podcast, so that you can join in.
Have you guys got some nailed on people you're definitely having in? Are you joining me in the Novak, Alcaraz, Swiatek, Jabeur quadruple, or have you got some tastier picks in my early doors?
There's a couple I really want to pick. Pablo Carreño Busta.
I was tempted by him, but he's 16th seed, isn't he?
Because he's 16th seed, he's in Alcaraz's bracket. If he was 17th seed, he'd be an absolute automatic pick. But yeah, that was the main one that I kind of want. I think 17 to 32 is going to be the tricky area. I mean, you basically just have to pick someone in the bottom half and hope.
Dan Evans was vaguely tempting. He might win a few.
Calvin said the other day when the draw came out, he's got Francisco Cerundolo, and then I think either Duckworth or Ema. He's obviously got Tsitsipas in the 3rd round, which isn't a great matchup. But
Musetti?
Or Lorenzo Musetti, yeah, indeed. Calvin, have you got any dark horses that are going to make their way into your stable?
No, I don't think so. I've not looked at it in detail yet, but I think I'll be going with the obvious ones. It's a strange slam this time, isn't it? It seems pretty easy to predict who's going to go places in it.
Seems that way.
Which almost certainly means it won't be.
I will say on the Evans one, I think whoever wins in Evans and Cherundolo will definitely beat either Duckworth or Ema.
There you go. Dan Evans, decent pick for a third round spot, it would seem. A nice segue to talk about the other British players. There's one other man in the draw. Commiserations to the qualifiers. Ryan Peniston, Paul Jubb, Liam Brody all beaten in qualifying, albeit I think they all lost to players who did end up qualifying, so no great shame in that. Cam Norrie, he's the number 10 seed. He has got wildcard Manuel Guinard in the first round, who's 26. He has he's never played a main draw Grand Slam, so feels like an opportunity. I mean, I don't really understand why necessarily he's got a wild card. I mean, he's a career high ranking of 151. I don't know if he's someone you might have come across, Calvin.
Guinard?
Yeah,
one of the players I coached used to played against him. He's a big lad, big unit, quite cumbersome. He can play. He beat Jack Draper, I think, last year. But he's not a player who I would think he's going to the top 50 in the world.
Cam Norrie then has either Kubler or Kudler in my favourite matchup of the first round. Dominic Thiem or Karen Hatchinoff in the third round. I mean, we haven't really touched on Thiem. We have a lot previously. George usually says, I think he's going to win today, and he's already lost. He hasn't won a match in a year, more than a year now. I think he's on a 10-match losing streak.
About time for him to win 7 in a row, then, isn't it?
Yeah, the classic he's due one. I mean, incidentally, Karen Hatchinoff's probably not an easy guy. I mean, Karen Hatchinoff has a good record on clay. And I think is someone we almost never talk about on any level. Like, I think his name might be mentioned the least of any top 30 player.
It's really funny because my enduring kind of memory of Hatchinov is like Greg Rosetsky relentlessly predicting he was going to be like the next big thing coming through. And I was always just watching him like, no, he's not, Greg. He's like a top 10 player at best. Like, I just don't see any evolution in this guy's game to suggest he's going to like break through.
I think he's probably not suffering from us not talking about him. The guy looks like the third Hemsworth brother. I think probably enough people talk about him, especially in the female population worldwide. So.
And he also gets, my other enduring memory of him is John Isner. I think the first time he played against him, being shocked that his name was Karen, because that's the name of Isner's mum, Karen Isner, I think. So that's just the other enjoyment.
Also,
he's a good player, isn't he? Catching on, I'm being a bit tongue in cheek there. He's obviously
he won that Paris Masters, didn't he?
Yeah,
won that Paris Masters out of nowhere and beat Djokovic, and you thought he's really going to take off here, but
that's a classic end of season result, isn't it? Like anyone who wins the ATP finals, we're like, next season's going to be huge, and it's just terrible. But
I mean, let's not forget that Jack Sock won the Paris Masters. It is a place that throws up slightly odd results. Norrie, if he does come through, Mr. Hatchinoff, he will face potentially Carlos Alcaraz in the fourth round, which is not a match any of us are expecting him to.
You mean if he comes through team?
Right, yes. Incidentally, he's in some form, Cam Norrie, because he is playing today in a final in Lyon. Having said, like, when he went out of the Australian Open this year, he said that he was probably going to strip back his schedule a bit and target the Grand Slams. And, I mean, this doesn't feel like targeting a Grand Slam, playing a final the day before the first round. But anyway, he's playing Alex Molcan, the Slovakian, who has Marian Vida in his corner. Novak Djokovic is his former head coach, and could play Djokovic in, I think, the second round of the French Open, which would be a fun little matchup. But yeah, good luck, Cam. He's beaten Cherundolo, Sebastian Baez, and Holger Rune this week, all of whom are in quite good form.
We've not mentioned Rune, have we? That's a bit of a surprise. He's surely going to win the first of his
17
French, or whatever it is.
I couldn't tell you where he's sitting in the draw. Is he in the bottom half? He is in the bottom half. He's got Denis Shapovalov in the first round.
Hard match, yeah. I was going to say, it's not an easy first one. He might win that.
Okay.
Might.
Yeah. Thanks, George. He might win. That's kind of true of all of them.
It put me off picking either of them. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't put anyone above 55% win rate in that match.
Incredibly, we've barely mentioned Emma Raducanu. In fact, we really haven't talked about her today. She has got, I think, a really tricky little first-round match. She's playing Linda Noscova, who is 16 years old, I believe, 17 years old. She won the junior French Open title last year, and then she subsequently came through qualifying to win her place in the draw. I think, I mean, you sort of think getting a qualifier in the first round is a good result. I think there's a bit of jeopardy there, George, isn't it?
I mean, look, it's a player who's ranked outside the top 120 or whatever normally, so it's never really a terrible draw unless you're unlucky enough to hit someone like Aslan Karatsev, who's then going to storm onto the top 20 or whatever. But I think Raducanu, you couldn't really ask for a better draw. A slam for her at the minute. Potential Kerber round 3. I mean, that's a bit of a gimme on clay if she gets there. She's lost to Sasnovich before. That's a potential second round player. But yeah, I mean, until you're talking about Ons Jabeur when they meet in, I think, round 4, potentially, that you'd hope Raducanu can get through though. And you know, we keep talking about points. She's going to lose her 4th round Wimbledon points as it stands, regardless of what she does there. So she can post a 4th round French Open to keep those on side, and then all she needs to do is win the US Open again to keep those, and she'll be fine. So,
yeah, she's slated to meet Ons Jabeur in the 4th round, which would be a pretty hefty challenge to say the least. And that assumes that she comes through. Yeah, as you say.
I would say that. I mean, you know, Jabeur's playing really well, but I still wouldn't be entering a Grand Slam tournament fearing Ons Jabeur in many ways. You know, it's all about this kind of experience.
I think you would be, and I think you
I would.
should
Yeah,
be.
I'd absolutely, particularly at the minute. You know, I wouldn't know I was a bloody serve at the moment. You know, for someone like Raducanu, who's a Grand Slam champion, you know, Jabeur's going to enter this tournament with a lot of kind of targets on her back, which she won't really be used to, kind of posting these 2 back-to-back big finals in Madrid and Rome. So, you know, I'm not sitting here thinking Ons Jabeur's nailed on for the French Open final. I think they're completely different kettle of fish. Again, my weekly mention of the extra day break for the women at the French Open makes it so much harder.
Yeah, she's also, as we should point out, picked up or employed a full-time hitting partner, Raymond Sarmiento, who is an American pro with a career high ranking of 287. He is 0-1 at ATP Tour level, but he is going to, it seems, be her full-time hitting partner for the foreseeable future. How long that lasts, of course, will depend on whether Ian likes him or not, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm wondering what aspect they're planning on sucking from him in the kind of mad kind of coaching Venn diagram. What's the aspect he's to not to win a match at tour level? They've seemed to have that down at the minute anyway. That's what I was about.
I mean, to be honest, I think if he's a nice bloke, I think that's massive. I was talking to no, I genuinely like. You know, obviously there's a lot to be said for a good coach, Calvin, I promise. But you're also going to spend a lot of time with this guy. And, like, realistically, tour life is hard. And getting on with someone is part of the challenge and spending a lot of time. You know, I spoke to Daria Abramovich this week, who is Iga Świątek's performance psychologist. And she talked a lot about their methods. And really, as much of it is she's there all the time. They have sessions and they have structured sessions that they're appointments they have to keep, but she's also just there chatting all the time, and that's really important. So, yeah, we'll see what becomes of that. I'm keen to move on because we're running out of time. Heather Watson is in the main draw. She has got, and this is one I'm definitely going to pronounce wrong. It's Elsa Jacquemot, who is another French wildcard. She's 19. She's ranked outside top 200, so you'd think Heather Watson can come through that and potentially play Angelique Kerber in the second. And then we've also got Harriet Dart, who has got Martina Trevisan, the Italian. Now, I think this is quite a bad draw because Trevisan has been to the quarterfinals of the French Open. She's also picked up some pretty sizable results in the last couple of weeks. I think she beat Muguruza in Morocco. So I'm not super comfortable with Harriet Dart winning in the first round. Has anyone got anything to suggest that she might?
I mean, just going back to Jabeur's draw, I mean, generally speaking, like Lynette and Trevisan are 2 slightly awkward first couple of round players.
Trevisan is playing as we speak as well. She's in the final in Morocco. So
I'm talking myself out of Jabeur, even though I've submitted my picks already. I think she could be a shock early exit.
Well, I think we've pulled that draw to pieces now. There's a few bits of any other business that are worth mentioning. Feliciano Lopez is not in the men's draw, which ends his 79 slam streak of consecutive participations. It goes back to Roland Garros in 2002. I think I'm right in saying that the new sort of father of the house in terms of Grand Slams is Grigor Dimitrov in terms of consecutive participations in Grand Slams, which it's weird to think of him being a sort of, elder statesman of the tour these days.
So what number's that, around the 50s, 40s?
He's been played every slam since the 2011 Australian Open. So that would be 45, I think it is.
45?
Or 41. I can't do maths. Which is impressive. And weirdly, I sort of assumed that he'd had some sort of big injury in that time, but I guess not big enough to keep him out of the slam. There's no chance Grigor Dimitrov wins this, is there?
No.
Good. Yeah, I just thought I'd check. He's playing quite well,
To mark that 44th consecutive slam, it's his first major title.
Maybe. I think that is all we've got time for. I'm going to be heading off in, about 12 hours to Paris, or 16 hours, I should say, for the French Open. I hope to be doing something for you every day. It might just be me. Sometimes it'll be me and George. Sometimes it'll be me, George, and Calvin. Just depending on timings and arrangements, because obviously we've got 10 nights of late tennis in Paris this year, which I'm delighted about, and definitely not gutted to be missing quite a lot of dinners. But yeah, so we will try and keep you right up to date. We'll do I think I'm right in saying 2 full length pods a week, and then as many podlets as we can possibly manage. Thank you very much for listening as always. Please do leave us a rating and a review, and follow us on Twitter, and of course play fantasy tennis and really show George up for the tour.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
AutoTrader makes buying a car easier than ever. How? With the largest inventory of new and used vehicles, AutoTrader lets you shop for cars by monthly payment, so you know what you'll pay before you buy. And you know the prices are good because they're backed by Kelley Blue Book. Finally, it's easy. Start shopping at autotrader.com/finally it's easy.